So I'm very excited to talk to you today about a real passion of mine, which is AI and how it's going to affect us in the Pocus world. There's some really exciting things on the horizon. This noise, for the older people here, will be recognised from an old science fiction thing from the 80s called Star Trek. And this guy used a device that seemed to know all the answers and was able to cure all of his team. And the device seemed to know what was going on at any one time, but it was the kind of device-human combination that seemed to make the difference. And we've been fascinated by this since that time, since the early 60s. The thought that machines might be able to start doing things like us was just too seductive for us to ignore. And so a lot of time went into teaching computers how to think like people, but you needed to give them rules and a method, which is what we had in the sort of up to the 80s. But as we went into the 90s, machine learning came in, and it was pretty simple at the beginning. You had to sort of expose the machine to certain things to teach it really how to think. But as time went on, it was able to do more and more by itself. This was a landmark moment in chess where a computer called Deep Blue beat Kasparov, who was a master at the time. Nobody could believe this would ever be possible. But as things moved through the 2000s, we really started getting into this thing called deep learning, which is when the computers start thinking for themselves fully and coming up with their own ideas. And going back to chess, this is the game that really changed the game. This is AlphaZero, which is Google DeepMind's computer, and it not just learned how to play chess without having been told how to do it. It just got exposed to loads and loads of games. But the fact that it was able to learn the game and start having metrics that beat the next best computer, it did all of this in 4 hours. And by 8 hours, it was superhuman, and it could beat anything that was thrown at it. And apparently, this machine was able to do things that humans would never have thought of. It would sacrifice pieces that masters would look and think that was just crazy. But then it would become obvious that they were able to think. It was able to think more creatively than human beings. The expression tireless learning gets used a lot around AI because it can do things at such pace and scale that it can do things beyond the capacity of humans to learn, and that was just one example. But we're talking about Pocus and how it affects us. So let's have a little think about how artificial intelligence and machine learning works. And it's obviously trying to mimic the brain's function. We know the brain is just a whole load of network connections that get laid down over time with feed forwards and feed backwards. And there'll be nothing new to you guys. You know all about the human brain. But a machine learning brain will do the same thing. You have multiple layers of connections that send signal forward and test and retest hypotheses, and that end up becoming more and more successful about identifying the goal. And the goal when you're teaching a computer is to teach it something called ground truth. Ground truth is the real fact. It's what we're asking the machine to look for. So I'll ask you this. If I asked you, how could you tell the difference between a cat and a dog? What are the features you think that you could explain to me that would make me understand that if I'd never seen a cat and a dog before? I think it's quite difficult. We sort of know, but but it's hard to articulate. But in fact, computers are taught, well, in this regard, to look for ears and noses. So if you have pointy ears and a small nose, you're probably a cat. And if you have big ears and round ears and a big nose, you're probably a dog. And you can the machine can separate those into those zones, put a line through the middle, and categorize animals. But of course, there are always going to be exceptions. And this guy here, this is a dog with pointy ears and a small nose. It thinks it might be a cat. Now, the whole thing about this is that a machine can learn how to feed those things back. So you take a training set to get a whole bit of data, thousands of things. You split it into a big group and a small group, which becomes the test data. You let the machine do its thing, and then you use that test to see if it's any good or not. And if it's no good or it's not perfect, you just keep going round and round the cycle. So this is called supervised machine learning, and this is the early stage stuff that came through the 90s and the 2000s. But listen, we all knew what a cat and a dog was before we could even speak, probably. And as children, toddlers, they can tell you straight away, that's a cat, that's a dog. They know because their brains have understood. And all they needed was enough reference point ground truth to learn from their parents and books. And so that's exactly what machines can do now. They can do what's called unsupervised learning. So you just show them loads of cats and dogs, and then you let them go at it, and they'll be able to do this, very, very well. And you've all got ideas of this on your phone, image searching and stuff, which are entered our daily lives and we accept without question. It does so because it mimics the brain and the vision. And what it can do is just look at something and know what the answer is. And that's really exciting because it's very good at it. But what's frustrating is it can't tell you why it knows. And that's perhaps one of the biggest drawbacks of the process at the moment. But I'll come back to drawbacks a bit later. We're here to talk about Pocus. And I'm going to focus now on some of the things that, as Pocus users, we worry about. So it depends who you are. If you're a novice, you're worrying about, am I holding the probe in the right place? Is the picture good enough? Am I analysing it right? Is my interpretation okay? And when else am I going to get some opportunity for training? Because that is really important in that early stages. But if you're past the novice period and you're an intermediate scanner, you're thinking, oh man, am I going to have time to do this? Because I've got loads of things to think about. Am I any good? What if I want to learn more things about measurement? Because at the moment I just try and do eyeballing. What if I need to know more about how to do things and progress my skill set? And if you are an expert, you're thinking, am I ever going to have any time to do all of this stuff? I'm worried about my quality, but also everyone else beneath me and my team. And how on earth am I going to have time to train them and supervise them for quality assurance? So these things are really important problems that this stuff is going to help us with. So let's kick off with improved workflows. And GE were the innovators here. It was about 6 years ago that it was launched. I first saw it at SMAC Dublin? No, was it? I can't remember. One of those SMAC, I think it might have been in Germany. But it was launched. This is their Auto VTI. It's part of their shock toolkit. And the machine's taught how to recognize an apical 5-chamber view, to know where the LV outflow tract is, and not only that, to place the sampling volume of pulse wave Doppler over it. And as you'll see in that screen just here at the top, just here, and sorry, over here at the top, you'll see the trace, and it knows what a trace should look like. And it looks for that, it looks for a closing click, and then it maps a contour around it and measures it all sort of mathematically. So essentially, it's doing all the things that we would have to do in a number of steps, and it does it very quickly. So it makes the whole thing more accessible. And yes, there are some times it doesn't track perfectly and you see the number vary a bit, but there are many times where it tracks it absolutely dead on, and it enables you to do passive leg raises and other such things in terms of the hemodynamic assessment. So massive time saving and labor saving device. I mentioned here about edge detection because this is the sort of, as I said, more of the earlier AI stuff, which is, look, let's think like a human, let's draw like a human, let's calculate like a human. And I'll come back to other possibilities too. And I'm also mentioning about rejection. It's saying, I don't know if you noticed that box is green, this one down here. It's green because it's happy. It says, yeah, no, this is all right. We've got the right position here, and I've got the right trace up here. So it's green. And if it's not right, it goes orange or red. This is about quality assurance, okay? And it's helping us to do things, and it's giving you reassurance that you're doing okay, or the machine's doing okay. But there are other tools in there. There's the IVC, auto IVC function, so it can measure it, it finds out where it is. You'll see that green bar across it. It holds it beautifully, and it measures that distance. Now, I probably don't use this number very much in my practice, but it's just a good example of how the technology has evolved. And this is the beeline counting, or the auto beelines. Now, counting these can be hard, and if you're really serious about a lung ultrasound, you might want to know the total score so that you could then use an intervention to reduce the beeline count. And this really helps you to do that. And if you follow the mapping of recording of the different zones, and they're illustrated here, they're not moving, but these are the kind of the windows you look for, it will auto count those scores for you. And that can be really helpful if you're quantifying lung injury. More recently, GE have launched this auto ejection fraction, and lots of other companies have done the same thing. This is edge detection and it's based on the speckle tracking technology, although it's not trying to measure strain, which is normally associated with that, but it's looking at the little the sort of unique shape of pixels, and when they move, it tracks it. It tracks it really, really well. So this gives really a fractional area change if you're just looking at one view, but as you move through other views, it will continue to track. And this technology is being built on all the time. And what's really interesting is you don't need an ECG for this stuff. AI can tell you what frame it's in, and in fact, you know how you record images, and it has probably a frame rate of about 30 per second, and you'll record the peak, the end diastolic volume, and the end systolic volume, and that's how Simpsons is generated. But you don't have to do any of that stuff because it knows it's already, and it gives you very, very high levels of detail and accuracy. So that's auto ejection fraction. It's not all about diagnosis, though. We'll come back to diagnosis. What about things that, when we try and do interventions? And this is one of the more recent GE products called the C-Nerve. And as you'll see, it's looking here at the brachial plexus, and it tells you that's the brachial plexus. I must say, I remember when my colleagues were into this in the early days, and they say, oh, look at this nerve. And I go, wow, I can't really see it. It looks the same as muscle. Now, I know there'll be many experts here in the audience who would never imagine they could not know this stuff, but I think probably the technology's got better, experts have become more available, but this is a way for people like me, perhaps not such an expert in this thing, to be a bit more confident about what we're doing. This is a sciatic nerve, and I'll just know that actually this is really tightly grouped, and it does it really nicely. Actually, sciatic nerve is quite hard to see, I understand, and when you come to feed in ground truth, some of the experts can't always agree very well, so the sciatic nerve can sometimes be sort of the area which it's predicting is bigger than it needs to be. This is ScanNav, which is a company called Intelligent Ultrasound who've got their version, and it's looking with other structures and highlighting them really nicely, so you can see them all here. And I could go on, but I'm going to shorten this for time. But you get the idea that AI is great at recognition of structures, labeling them for you potentially, and allowing your procedures to be more safe. This is one of my colleagues, Madan, who is an expert in sticking needles in people, and this is a Mindray machine that has voice recognition.
Freeze image.
So I'm not sure if we can hear that, but what he's saying is reduce depth, increase gain, etc. So enabling you to interact without using your hands, which is quite an interesting step forward for workflow. And again, just finishing off on procedural stuff, this machine, the Akira, is really brilliant. It's just showing you how it's looking in between the vertebrae at sometimes what can be a difficult procedure to get spinal aspiration or injection, and it locates the space for you, tells you where to go, it tells you how deep the space is, and then what angle you're at. And I think, I've not used this very much myself, but it's just another example of how the kit is coming through and rendering really meaningful images to us and helping us do what we need to do. Let's get back to sort of diagnosis and volumetric assessment. This is obviously the butterfly, and it's looking at the bladder volume. Now, bladder volume is quite difficult to measure if you're just using the different dimensions. But this, if you just see, he's holding the probe there, and it scans all the way through, and then it renders a true three-dimensional object, which you can see here. And then, of course, measuring the volume of that is quite straightforward for a computer to do. So measuring static volumes in the body is really straightforward. But what about training? Because that's the big thing, isn't it? That's the hard thing for us all to access. And more importantly, what about quality assurance? Here's a paper to show that one of the problems in echocardiography is foreshortening the ventricle. We talked yesterday about how to recognize a true apex of the left ventricle, but if you don't recognize it, it all looks squashed up, and then if you start measuring bits and bobs in there, you can get really inaccurate really quickly. This is a paper that was published in 2020, and this it's giving the example, the green bit is the true apex, the right is the sort of foreshortened apex, and you get to see the area differences there. This technology will take that four-chamber view, and it will tell you if it's foreshortened, and it does it. It gives you that red triangle and says, well, and it's looking at the apex and how mobile it is. One of the things to know that you're on the left ventricular apex is that it's completely motionless. It stays still, and the rest of the heart moves up and down towards it. So here, and it's also thicker than it should be. The apex is the thinnest part of the ventricle, and it should look thinner than the side walls. But as you can see here, it doesn't. And that's a bit of software that's just giving it a warning that you're not about to measure the correct thing. The problem with all of this stuff is how you determine ground truth, and all we've got is experts. We've got expert cardiologists who have an opinion on things, and we feed all that data in, and it becomes the ground truth, the sort of average of those things. And this is just an example of how different experts see things differently. They're looking at tracing the walls of the left ventricle, and you can see the big difference in colours there. So it's one of the challenges of AI, is getting the perfect ground truth. But look, training is about what if you had someone over your shoulder all the time telling you what to do. Now, there may well be trainers in this audience, and those of us who look at images and try and teach people how to move the probe to get the best image, that's a learning curve in itself. That takes years, I think, and sometimes it's hard to articulate. I can do this very well in the parasternal, the apical window. I'm less good in the subcostal window, but AI can do all of that for you. And this is this is a third-party application which I think is attached to the Clarius ecosystem, and you've already seen here now, it gets the right view. You've got a suggestion of where position should be. This is the reality over here. And as you'll see, I quite like the way it renders that to sort of remind you of how to get back to the image that you need. So that's one example. We've already seen the butterfly probe here. This is not out into the market yet, but this is the using the back camera and a sort of addition to help the camera know how the probe is moved, and it'll give advice to get you to the right view. And by the way, you wonder how this works. How on earth does the computer know? And it's because sonographers, physiologists have spent hours and hours and hours looking at thousands of images, and the computer says, which one's better, this one or this one? You go, this one. And then it throws up another two. Which one's better, this one or this one? Oh, that one. And the machine just takes it all in, and then it's able to reject the poor image and encourage you towards a better one. At the moment, this is a handheld that's really kind of majoring on AI in a major way. Echonews produced a thing called what am I trying to say? It'll come back to me. Oh my God, I should know the name of this, but it'll come back to me. It's a really, really great piece of kit. Cosmos it's called. Before I press play, I want to show you a few things. So up here is an example of how the beam should be in the image we're looking for. There's a whole load of stuff you'll recognize. These are different functions. We don't need to worry about that. Here is the reflection of the ultrasound beam as it comes out the probe, as it appears on the chest wall. These red lines they'll change color and they'll go green, and more of them will appear the better the image quality gets. Okay, and you'll notice some annotation. Now, I have never seen anything work as quickly as this does. When I put the probe down, it can identify structures quicker than I can even begin to, and then they ping up and they continuously move around as I move the probe, and as I change different views, it will pick all of the other structures up in a flash of an eye. I can't tell you how quick it is. And I think in terms of plausibility and respect from a clinician to a computer, when the computer can obviously do things better than you, quicker than you very quickly realize that this is something to take seriously. And you can see this as the view gets better. I mean, you'll have seen better 2D images, but this is something you really should have a look at if you get a chance. So this is about quality assurance, continuous teaching, and making sure that what you're doing is correct. Now, there's a difference between accuracy and precision. This guy is both accurate if he's going for a 20, and he's also very precise because every one of them goes in to that 20. If he was going for the bullseye, he'd be very precise but not accurate. Does that make sense? So precision is not brilliant in echocardiography, because to have a ground truth, you have to usually use multiple experts who all have subtle differences in the way they interpret things. And just remember that cardiologists don't record a single number that doesn't fit with their initial visual impression. So one of the fears they've always had about us getting involved with measurement is that we're going to just measure something badly, lose the fact that we can't, we don't have the expertise to see what the true function's like, and we'll start making bad decisions, okay? So it's really interesting. They use this bias all the time, and you would hope that if they're the experts, that will be a good bias. But of course, there's individual variation, and so even the ground truth might not be as perfect. But of course, if you have, let's say, 3 experts producing a different number for ejection fraction, and the machine does it, your precision is likely to be much, much higher with the machine. It will keep doing the same number, and the question is the accuracy the same? And I'll touch on that a bit more in just a minute, in terms of papers that suggest it does. But this is another feature of the Cosmos. You'll see these views. Many of you will recognize the shorthand for the different views we're looking at and different information. And of course, we've got some spectral Doppler here. If you take these images on the Cosmos and you trigger pulse wave, continuous wave, and you record those things, usually you'd have to stop them, trace around them, ask the machine to tell you what the LVOT VTI is, for instance. But you don't have to worry about that, because the machine will take all that information and then it sends it. Well, first of all, it sends it up to. First of all, the machine will capture the best window possible. So it won't record it until you've got the right thing. It will then record it, and then it will send it up to the cloud. And this thing that is known as US2AI, which is an American cloud system, will report it for you and bring it back down again, and give you really detailed information. I'm telling you, to get this kind of data out of an echo, you're talking at least 45 minutes to an hour of constant acquisition, manipulation, sometimes calculation, and reporting. This will do it for you in no time at all. Now, whether it's accurate is something we all have to kind of, work out ourselves. But as this thing blends into our everyday life, and like I said about the annotation stuff, once you realize how brilliant it is, it's very, very difficult to not trust it. There is this is some technology which I'm going to dwell on. It's a software company called Caption. It's American. It's doing all the things that you just heard me talk about. It's feeding in 2D information. Have you lost it? Okay. I don't know if there's anyone here who might be able to get one of the technical guys. I'm not sure, guys, if you can hear me. But we seem to have, that's great, thank you. We seem to have a visual loss on the main screen. So if there's any of you techs here to help me, that would be great. Could one of... Okay, well, I'll describe it. Now, you've seen already the different components. This is what the probe looks like. This is what it should look like. This is the position in the body. You should be seeing it. And this is the actual image. And over here, we've got a quality bar. And when it hits green, it's auto-capturing, okay? So it's just the same as all the other software. But Caption really is the buzzword when you read around the subject. And it's where there's a lot of strong evidence to show that this... All right, so I'll come back. I don't know if you happen to see there, it was constantly giving you ejection fraction data, and the more windows you gave it, the more confident it was about that ejection fraction, and it was processing it all of the time. And what's really interesting is it's not doing it from the apical 4 and the apical 2 windows, which is what we do in cardiology. It's doing it from all of the windows. In fact, it's taking your parasternal long axis and it's feeding all that information in. And it's really interesting that in cardiology, they'll talk about fractional shortening and a relationship with ejection fraction, and we know there's a tabular relationship there, but they never ever use that information to report. They always use the 4-chamber and the 2. But there's loads of other information they're missing, and that parasternal long axis is very commonly used in point of care ultrasound to make estimates of these things. And I mention all of this because, well, here's the data. I mean, it's really powerful. This study showed medical students could have a 2-hour teaching session and then be guided to the views and be as good as any cardiologist in terms of image acquisition and machine interpretation. So they could get the images almost untrained, following the guidance, and then the information that provided was as good as an expert. And this is just one study. Here's another. This happens to be nurses. But it doesn't matter. You know, you can do things. To get ejection fraction and be confident about it takes years and years of hours and hours of work to be any good. In point-of-care ultrasound, we don't do this level of detail. We say, is it really bad? Is it okay? I care about the bit in the middle. But you know, to be a cardiologist or a sonographer, it takes years and years of practice to be good. And this machine will allow people who've never held a probe before to do it. And it's powerful stuff. And there are many, many examples. This, by the way, is looking at all the different views, not just ejection fraction. Well, I'm going to end on this, and I've had to do a bit of digging, because this is a GE-sponsored talk, but GE haven't yet announced the future, but I've sort of worked it out, because I've done a bit of digging. This is a Business Insider website, and in February they bought Caption, which is the stuff I've just shown you, where all the evidence comes from, and we're about to have a new version of the vScan Air. I generally don't know what's inside it, but I'm pretty sure that that's where this is going to get launched. So, you know, we'll know perhaps in a few months whether I'm right or not, but I'm pretty sure that will come with the software that will help to guide us to where we need to go. And there it is. So let's just take a couple of minutes to finish up, because, you know, yeah, it's great to have new skills, but let's just think about the cautions or the limitations, and are we about to go down some nightmare digital black hole? There are some problems with AI-based stuff. If you give it a cohort of patients and then ask it to look at a different cohort of patients, maybe ethnically different, you know, or more males than females, or whatever it is, it won't be quite as good. So all cohorts now have many, many thousands. We're talking hundreds of thousands of subjects to reduce that risk. I said it's really good at measuring bladder volumes, but it's not perfect at measuring cardiac volumes yet, because that's a moving structure. It's quite complex, so we're not there yet. And of course, point of care images are going to be less perfect than expert acquired images, and so there is a signal to say that perhaps AI struggles a bit more with Pocus images. But I'd just like to say, well, you know, have you ever seen those old Victorian films that have been super animated and, you know, with high frame rates, and suddenly we start seeing Victorian people with coloured clothes and things? You know, the technology can do this stuff, and it's only a matter of time before you'll be able to click a button and it will do incredible things to make our images better. The thing that's holding it back at the moment is acceptance by regulators. You know, if you think how much ChatGPT has done to us in our own lives, and how ubiquitous it is, and how we just like, oh yeah, cool, ChatGPT, yeah. The only reason this isn't rapidly moving into the healthcare market is because of FDA and CE. I still kind of work out how to approve it, but they are, because they're getting more and more exposed to it, and once they do, then the opportunities are going to be limitless. The biggest limitation is us and our own trust or mistrust of this stuff. And I think, you know, like I said, once you get your hands on and see how amazing this stuff can be, I think we'll be probably trusting it quite quickly. My last slide is the future and where this is heading. And I think, well, it won't be long before you have automatic mode switching. So you'll just hold the beam on the apical four-chamber, and it'll tell you, just hold it, tilt up, tilt down, hold it there, thanks very much. And it will go boop, 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 just shooting off all of those modalities of spectral Doppler and measurements and so on, to take that information and then give it back to you in a processed way. It will be able to anticipate what you're thinking next, and it will start delivering. Do you want to do this now? Okay, you normally do this next, how about this? It's not difficult stuff from a computing standpoint. And the biggest change that will be coming in the next 5 years will be machines that are able to describe what they're thinking and why. They'll be able to describe why and tell you how they know. And that will be really interesting, because we'll find out a whole load of things we never knew, but perhaps we always knew, because just like kids know between cats and dogs. So look, you know, this guy was brilliant because it was him and a machine. And the truth is, we're never going to be a machine on its own. It's always going to be us together. And the machines will always say, hey, look, do you think this is okay, this information? Here's what I think. And you'll go, yeah, that's cool. Let's go with it. So it's going to always be the combination of the both of us. But yeah, AI will definitely change what we do. And I think I can't wait to see the next 5 to 10 years. Okay. I'm going to leave it there. I hope there's some time for questions, and there's my contact details if you need. So thanks for listening.